Well, hey everyone. Thank you all for joining us. I'm Ilya Fushman. I'm a partner at Kleiner Perkins. It's a lot of smoke here.
There's a lot of smoke.
At KP, Kleiner Perkins, we partner with really iconic entrepreneurs who want to make history. We've been around for about 53 years, early investors in Google, Genentech, Amazon, and most recently companies like Figma, and the next generation of iconic companies like Harvey. AI, I mean, it's pretty obvious, is a foundational and just incredibly transformational technology in all facets of our lives, but specifically in how we work. And we were excited to start our relationship with Harvey by leading their Series B in 2023 and have invested and led a few rounds, pretty much every round since then we've invested in, because Gabe and his co-founder Winston Weinberg founded Harvey to bring the power of large language models to transforming how we work, starting with one of the oldest and most intricate professions, which is law. Gabe has incredible experience at the forefront of technology, doing research at Meta, Google Brain, DeepMind. Winston was a deep expert on the legal side. Gabe happens to run a 4-minute and 20-second mile, as far as I'm told. They're very intense. And in 3 short years, Harvey has gotten to over 700 customers across 58 countries, crossed 100 million in run rate a little while ago now, so it's even better than that today, and has opened offices across London, Toronto, Sydney, New York, San Francisco, and Bengaluru, and they're hiring, by the way, especially in Europe as well. But first, let's start with the origin story, Gabe. Why did you decide to leave research and start a company? And why did you decide to do Harvey as a company in law?
When I started doing AI research 15 years ago now, it was always with the intention of figuring out how to apply this technology. I think when I first started working on deep learning, I had an intuition that this was going to be a really transformative technology, and I wanted to figure out how to use this to, sounds kind of cheesy, but make the world a better place. And I wanted to find an industry where applying that technology would be kind of a really meaningful, like, societal impact. I thought at the time it was going to be personalized education. Left DeepMind to actually try to start that company when I was here in London. And then later on, when I was at Meta, Winston and I were roommates. He was a lawyer. He showed me a lot of the things he was working on. I showed him the large language models that I was working on, and it was kind of this light bulb moment of this is going to be one of the really big applications of this technology.
That's awesome. And you guys were roommates for a little while, up until recently, not roommates anymore.
Still roommates,
still
which
roommates.
is,
Okay.
yeah. I mean, met and never thought we would start a company together, just became best friends, and then, yeah.
So there's like 2 of you guys. It's pretty early days of even just AI models.
Yeah.
So talk about like the early, like what did the product look like, and how did you guys actually develop it in terms of finding product market fit, but also surrounding yourselves with people who could help you build this?
Yeah. So when we first raised money from OpenAI, was our seed investor, we kind of didn't know what we were building. It was kind of AI plus legal seems like the right direction. We looked at some consumer things, and then OpenAI showed us GPT-4 before this was released, before ChatGPT existed. And when we saw that, it was kind of this, oh my God moment of this technology is going to change how people work and do everything. And I still remember Winston went into his room for 14 hours, played with the model, came out and just said, I did all of it. And I was like, what do you mean? And he was like, I did so much of the associate work I had done using these models. And it was obviously super hacky and all these like prompt techniques. But when I saw that combined with the research I'd done at DeepMind in reinforcement learning, it was so clear you would be able to build these agents that could take these models and the tools and figure out how to compose them. And so that was the early product, and then showed it to A&O, which was one of the largest law firms in Europe and in UK. And David Wakeling, who's a senior partner there and CIO, just saw it and was like, oh, this is what I've been looking for. And so I think got really lucky to find someone like that and get this really early traction with the product.
So you guys were a European customer company,
Yeah.
first and foremost.
Yeah, our first two big customers were A&O and then PwC in UK and then expanded in Europe. And so since the start of Harvey, we've been international. And I think something that was so magical about these models is their translation ability, that we were able to go to many countries quickly. And now we're in 58 different countries.
So lawyers are not the most technology-forward bunch, as far as I've been told. How do you think about building products for this kind of audience? And you do it obviously for large law firms, but also enterprises in-house. You just talk about like, how do you build an applied product in the world of AI?
Yeah, I think this was something that was actually so counterintuitive, where I think historically lawyers haven't been tech forward because the tech has not been based around language, and so much of the work they do is language based. But I think it was actually surprising to most people how quickly these law firms adopted this technology. And really early on, we had very senior partners that were coming to us and saying, look at these crazy things I did with Harvey. And so I think this technology was actually a perfect fit for lawyers. And once we started giving it to them, we just got so much feedback of, I need you to connect this to case law, to my data rooms, and kind of all the things that the product you needed to build around these models.
Awesome. And how did you were, I think, about 20 people or so at the Series B.
Yeah.
You're vastly beyond that now at about 500.
Yeah.
In less than 3 years. It's pretty fast scaling. Just to talk about that, like what does it take to scale a team, and how do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that part has been definitely the most stressful, incredible experience of scaling this. I think the biggest is kind of the early team and the leadership. So I think that first 10, 20, 50 people we hired really set the foundation of the culture of the company, and just finding people who cared as much as Winston and I did. And like now when I meet people that I wasn't part of the interview process, I'm like, oh, I would have also hired that person. And then I think same, finding senior leadership that is the same way, of just that deep care, finding investors that are that way. I think a lot of what the other investors have helped is just how do you scale the company and the business? Because I think there was a lot of the initial product where you needed the intuition, but then a lot of the company building, you guys have seen this a bunch of times, and we come to you and say, hey, we need to figure this out. And you guys are like, here's a person to talk to, or we've seen this before, so.
And I mean, obviously part of the company is grounded in deep research.
Yeah.
And part of it is like very applied software. I think when you and I were talking about this, you said it's almost like we're building SaaS now.
Yeah.
You just, what are these companies, Harvey and others who are building vertical applications of AI, what do you think they look like over time in terms of composition of team? And then also, does it come back to research at some future state? Like maybe talk about this.
Yeah, I think we were talking about this, and it feels like it's kind of yo-yoing, where when we started the company, our initial technical hires were another research scientist from Brain, one of the early folks who helped build some of Tesla's self-driving systems, researcher from Meta. And at the time, the models weren't quite good enough that you could build a product without really getting them to work. And so we did a bunch of applied AI work to make the product really good. And then as we've scaled, all of the product problems have shifted to, we're selling to very large enterprises, to large law firms, all of the product and enterprise problems you need to solve at scale. But now we're getting back into the position where 2 years ago, law firms, enterprises said, don't train on our data. And now they're starting to ask, oh wait, we've built all these really interesting workflows, we've built a bunch of trust with you, can we start thinking about how we can start using AI and kind of training on this, on data and things like that. And so I think the medium will be somewhere between AI research, enterprise, and we'll end up somewhere in the middle.
And obviously you and Winston are sort of the deep technical researcher and the lawyer expert, but inside the company you also have this kind of legal expertise matched with technical expertise. You tell us a bit about that. How did you build this kind of capability on the legal side in-house, and how do you think about evolving that?
Yeah, so I think really early on when Winston and I were building the product, it worked so well to have a technical or an AI person just sit and talk with a lawyer, because it was impossible to find someone who had both. And really early on, one of our first hires was actually my younger brother, who worked at the same law firm as Winston. And then he brought two of his best friends from law school, and so we got a bunch of lawyers early on. On the sales side, Winston hired one of his friends from college that had worked at Latham, and so we got both on the product and the sales side lawyers from Big Law that I think really shaped how we thought about both building the product and communicating the value of the product to law firms. And when we build the product today, it's still, we have a bunch of lawyers on the product team, on the sales team that sit with the rest of our traditional product and AI team to figure out, hey, this is how you would use this on a complex legal problem.
Yeah. And where does this all go? Obviously, large language models are getting better. Right? We saw Gemini 3 come out. It's beating a bunch of benchmarks. You can argue whether pre-training or post-training is going to be more important, but overall, models continue to improve. How do you think about building on top of that?
Yeah.
And how do you think about differentiation from large language models?
Yeah, I think the big shift of how we've thought about Harvey is when we first built the product, it was a co-pilot for individual lawyers. As we've scaled, really the value prop that we want to sell to law firms is we will make your business better. And so it's not enough to just make individual associates 20% more effective. You need to figure out how does this platform make the business or make a law firm more profitable. And a lot of that comes from all of the infrastructure around how they manage all of their client matters, which is the projects they work on, how they optimize where people are spending time. And I think one really interesting part is also just directly how they deliver the services. And so we're starting to build a lot of infrastructure that lets law firms and their clients work together directly on Harvey. And so we think of a lot of the product as not going to be the models, it's going to be all of the infrastructure around them you need to do kind of these complex, highly regulated businesses.
And if you were starting Harvey today,
yeah,
given the availability of better models, do you think it would look different?
I think we build...
Actually, would you start Harvey today?
Yeah, so I think that's a better question. I think if I was starting a company now, I would think about, to me, when internet came out, there was all these incredibly counterintuitive companies like Airbnb and Uber and TikTok, which I think before that technology existed, you kind of couldn't think about. And so if I was starting a company now, I would think about those. I think 3 years ago, Harvey was not obvious to start, and that's why it was a good time to start it. I think now I probably would start kind of the first category of company.
Yeah. And where does this all go? What's the future of just human AI, knowledge work, productivity?
Yeah.
What's the research brain telling you?
I think it's when we started the company, the really long-term thing that I was excited about is thinking about where does the unique data to train these models come from? And if you think of what's happened in the past 3 years, you've scraped all of the public data, and so you've put all that into these public models, and now folks are starting to build agents and look at private data. And I think law firms and professional service providers have some of the most unique human knowledge in the world, but it's all private. And so even for an individual law firm, you can't go and train on all that data because it's work they've done with a specific client. And so I think the thing we're really excited about is when you have a law firm and a large client that they've done a bunch of work together, how can you help them convert that relationship, that expertise into AI systems, into models, and monetize those in new ways? So I think it's really thinking about how to take expertise, not of just individuals, but of large organizations and put these into models in meaningful ways.
And what does that look like from just a product perspective, ultimately?
Yeah, when we think of, so we work a lot with large private equity firms, large enterprises. If you think of a large private equity firm, they do a bunch of fund formation, KP does fund formation, and you do investments out of it. And so one product direction we think about with VCs, with private equity firms, is can we build a platform where they can manage all their funds? When they want to create a new fund, they can collaborate with their law firm, their fund counsel on that. When they want to make an investment out of that fund, whether it's a Series B into Harvey or it's taking a large company private, they can work with their law firm on that. And I think at scale, a lot of the value comes from being able to synthesize all of that knowledge of all these different projects rather than them being kind of more siloed how they are now.
And what does that, do you think, mean for people who are coming into the legal field now? I mean, I think you have an interesting program where you're partnering with universities.
Yep.
Just how do you, because a lot of folks are sort of asking like, well, if all these tools automate this work, like what happens to first-year lawyers or first-year associates in venture, for example, how do you think about that? Is it just better tools and you can just do faster?
Yeah, I would say I don't think there's a better time than now to enter these very high-skill knowledge work professions, because I think about when I was learning programming over 10 years ago, I had to go on Stack Overflow and read all these forums, and most topics I was just like, I don't have a good teacher, I'm not going to learn that. And now with ChatGPT, you can just learn all of these topics so much more quickly. And I think the thing that's not going to happen is these models get so good that they do all this work end to end. I think instead what happens is they give knowledge workers so much more leverage. And so I think you'll see more knowledge workers, and the tops, like most skilled knowledge workers, will actually be more successful than they are today. And yeah, so I think I'm optimistic. We get the question a lot of, should people still go to law school? And I think it's the same as programming. It's like, I think these professions are going to be even more exciting. And so I would say, yeah.
Makes sense. Well, there's always fewer or more venture capitalists, but that's...
I think there's going to be more venture capitalists too,
venture capitalists, right? There's more great companies to invest in. Maybe switching gears back to Europe, you announced a strategic partnership with EQT. You have obviously offices in London. Just what are your plans for Europe? How do you think about Europe?
Yeah, so kind of like you mentioned, our first 2 customers were in Europe. That's always been a big footprint for us. I think there's a lot of interesting regulatory data privacy problems that we want to solve. All of the large enterprises we are starting to work with operate globally and largely in Europe, and so I think we have an office here in London with 70 people, and so want to continue to scale in Europe, both on the customer side, but also the talent side. We're hiring folks. I worked at DeepMind, and there's a bunch of really good technical talent here, and so want to keep scaling up.
You're partnering with Mistral and
starting to
11
talk
Labs,
more.
Right?
Exactly. We recently announced a partnership with 11 Labs, which I think is really cool, at figuring out how to make Harvey's voice work in every language and kind of all of the different regions with kind of the right dialect, which I think will be really important, especially as we think about, we're starting to do more work for government systems, access to justice, things like that. And I think voice mode will be kind of a really interesting application of that. And then also starting to work with kind of Mistral open source model providers of how can we solve some of these data problems. And I think that's one avenue.
And what do you, when you look out kind of into the future of Harvey, like where do you want to take the company? And what's like the dream? Why, both the dream kind of in the near term, but also, why are you ultimately doing this?
Yeah. So I would say on the business side, the biggest is, can we build a platform that lets law firms and their clients work together to figure out kind of the new way to deliver these services, eventually expand that to more broadly professional services. And then I think the original mission, and when Winston and I started Harvey, we were looking at access to justice. And I think to me there's 2 levels of that. There is one, can we just use this technology to provide the high quality legal services that the largest companies get to individuals? And then I think the even more exciting one is we're starting to work with governments, and I think these systems get good enough where you can start thinking about how do you provide society the tools to figure out better legal systems, because you could have the case where everyone has access to legal services, but you don't have the right legal system. And so starting to think about those, and we've done some things with court systems in various countries. And so I think that, to me, when I think of like, why are we doing this, that feels super meaningful.
And part of that is knowing that the answer is correct, right? Because the stakes are pretty high.
Yeah.
And legal is not, it's somewhat subjective, right? It's just in terms of the work. So how do you actually figure out that you're producing high quality results, and how do you and what does it take to get it to the scale of this sort of democratization?
Yeah. So I think the biggest is human in the loop. So part of why we wanted to start working with the largest law firms is they are one of the best industries in the world at making sure that you don't make mistakes. And so we've learned a ton in working with them as design partners. There's a bunch more we've built into the product. And then I think as we start working with kind of like governments, things like that, I think there's a lot to learn of how do you make this safe so you can deploy it at scale. But I think the biggest is working with lawyers, human in the loop, and just learning from them of how to do this.
Okay. Well, what's big for you in 2026? What are you most excited about?
The biggest is building out, I think, kind of this client collaboration that we were talking about. So we've been starting to do this with some early clients and their law firms, and just figuring out what are ways that they can build workflows, models, things like this together, deliver services in new ways. I would say that we're really excited and seeing a bunch of traction there.
And what are you generally seeing just in the kind of AI and vertical AI and really AI for knowledge work? And where is all of this going?
Yeah, I would say on the AI side, the trend that we're starting to see is figuring out how to turn your product into these reinforcement learning environments. So I think you've seen this with a lot of the coding companies where they're starting to think about, okay, I deploy this agent in my IDE, it takes all this actions, and it can learn from the subsequent user actions. And we've been thinking a lot about, if you think of what that is for Harvey, it is a client matter. So if you're working on a litigation, a diligence, we deploy agents that interact in that environment. And so how can we start helping law firms train those systems on these longer term, more end-to-end legal tasks? And I think that's kind of the most exciting, like, open legal AI research problem that we're tackling, and generalize this to kind of more broadly professional services.
Awesome. Well, thank you.
Thanks so much for having me.